pop-synth sound became emblematic of the 1980s. Simple Minds topped the charts on both sides of the Atlantic with hits like Don't You Forget About Me and Alive and Kicking. Selling more than 60 million albums and filling stadiums around the world. Founding member Jim Kerr is now accompanied by new musicians and has a new record out called Direction of the Heart.
So did I dream, or did I dream you spoke to me? You wanted with a solstice kiss.
Jim Kerr, hello. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hello.
Now, we're going to be talking music in a minute, but first, we're in Paris, and I wanted to talk about this town. You've played on the most prestigious stages here over your career, but I believe one of your earlier visits was a happy accident, hitchhiking with band member Charlie Burchill. Can you tell us what happened there?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was arriving yesterday in Gare du Nord, nostalgia, great memories. We were on a hitchhiking trip from Glasgow to London at the time. My Glasgow friend had moved to London, and quite quaint, he used to send letters. And he would say, you got to come and see this band, or you got to come and see that band. But he wrote to us about this thing called punk rock, and particularly the Sex Pistols. We had 2 weeks, summer holiday. Let's go to London and see the Sex Pistols play. But the lifts were going so well that the last lift we got just outside of London, the lorry driver said, this was a Friday night, I'm going to Paris on Sunday. And we were like, really? And in those days, you could get a temporary passport from the post office. What a difference. Anyway, we thought, screw the Sex Pistols, Paris, that's something else. So that was our first experience of France.
Your latest record, Direction of the Heart, is characterised by that uplifting pop rock energy that we associate with Simple Minds. But I believe it was written a lot and recorded during the pandemic, the lockdowns, not the most optimistic time. How did you manage to find those glimmers of hope?
Well, the great thing about having an art is that, especially one that's all-encompassing, you can kind of disappear into it and time just passes. So, of course, during the pandemic, which, you know, I mean, you can't exaggerate how profound and scary for a lot of people that was. And so in amongst all that uncertainty, in amongst all that confusion, we did what we always do. We escaped into our music. And in some ways, I think the record benefited from that added commitment.
And the ball starts spinning, there would be no sign, no future love, only days behind. I call on you, you're the only one who pulls me through.
One of the singles on that album, Vision Thing, talks about your dad, who's sadly no longer with us. I believe the two of you were very close, that he taught you a lot. Can you tell us a bit about his legacy?
I don't want to overly romanticize it, but it was a great childhood. School was great, everyone played in the street. And my dad, all his life, was a labourer, construction labourer. I remember my dad took me to the library. I was 5 years old, and he impressed on me how lucky I was to have this library ticket. You don't know how lucky you are, all these books, and kids all over the world would love to have this. And so he also gave us the first £100 to make our original demos, and which I then hitchhiked to London again with cassettes and dropped them off at the record companies. Subsequently, we got a record deal. And right up to his last days, he never failed to remind me, I haven't had that money back yet, with interest. But he was a huge supporter to us, and even in his illness, he was adamant that we would keep working.
Simple Minds were already a major name in the UK in the early 1980s, but the 1985 single, Don't You Forget About Me, pushed the band to planetary stardom. How did you feel when you were recording that song? Did you know it was going to change your career?
Well, for those who don't know, we didn't write that song. It was the first song we'd ever recorded that we didn't write. And we didn't want to do it because it wasn't our song. But the director of the movie, the director of the Breakfast Club movie, where the song was such a huge part of, John Hughes, he was a huge fan of British pop, English pop, and he really wanted Simple Minds. But you want Simple Minds, take a Simple Minds song. But anyway, on meeting John and then meeting Keith Forsey, who produced it, it was a kind of thing where we liked them better than their song. And let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. So we took, I think, 3 hours in a studio in Wembley, thinking it'll be a B-side, or it'll be some obscure movie no one will hear of and keep the record company happy. Simple Minds were at the door of the big league anyway, but that song blew the doors off.
Don't you forget about me. Don't you forget about me.
1985 was a really big year because that was when you played Live Aid, the now legendary benefit gig that took place in London and Philadelphia simultaneously.
Yes.
Now, Simple Minds were on the American edition of the event, so you were sharing the stage with people like the Beach Boys, Bob Dylan, Madonna. Although that sort of fundraising event of that scale wasn't so common at the time, it was a bit of a gamble for the organisers.
Yeah.
What convinced you to get on board?
Well, Bob Geldof convinced us. Bob could convince anyone to do anything. Don't You Forget About Me was number one in many places, but, you know, it was particularly number one, top of the Billboard charts, and to be asked to play, we were thrilled, but I have to say secretly, we wanted to be in Wembley with all our pals. But nevertheless, the song was number one, America. Geldof was adamant, you're going to America to play it. And as you quite rightly say, Bob Dylan, Led Zeppelin, Tina Turner, Madonna, it wasn't so bad.
Major social and political causes have always been important to you, I get the impression. Just this year, you played a benefit concert for UNICEF and the children of Ukraine in Edinburgh. And going back to the 80s again, you were a really strong ally in the fight against apartheid in South Africa, writing Mandela Day, the song, and performing at 2 special concerts.
It was 25 years to take that man away. Now the freedom moves in closer every day.
I believe you met the man himself, Nelson Mandela. How was that?
It was amazing to meet Nelson Mandela because when we first got involved in the campaign calling for his release and calling for the end of apartheid, which at that time Margaret Thatcher's government was dragging their heels over, it's amazing to think, but they were still referring to Mandela as a terrorist. We didn't imagine that so soon we would see him walk free, which was, I remember where I was at the time and being overjoyed because he was a symbol of so much outside of South Africa. He was a symbol of anyone that, I mean, what a struggle he had, what a struggle those people had. So it was a symbol within all our own lives or struggles that you could overcome. And then we didn't expect that almost immediately, within weeks, he was in London and he very graciously took all the artists that had been involved in the campaign into the room and we got the chance to talk to him. In our case, he wanted to talk about Scotland because I didn't know, but he was a fisher. He liked to fish and he wanted to know about fishing salmon. Well, I'm from a housing estate in Glasgow. The idea of fishing for salmon is the last thing, but I had to kind of pretend I knew something about it.
Now, as a Scot from Glasgow, you've explored your Celtic roots through music, with the #1 hit Belfast Child, for example. But now I believe you're based in Italy, in Taormina, in Sicily. How would you describe your relationship with the UK today? Has it changed?
Well, my relationship with Italy goes back to going on a school trip when I was 13. And I remember getting off the plane in Italy and kind of blinking and thinking, wow, the world's in colour. And even though I was only there for 2 weeks, I got this strange notion in my head, when I'm an old man, I'm going to come and live here.
We found a kind of paradise. There's something really cosmic here. All of Italy is beautiful, but when you have the volcano, these historical waters,
It became home from home, but now it is my home, and I look at Britain and Scotland from a perspective as someone who lives in Italy, and obviously the last few years some of it has been mind-blowing, particularly Brexit and the implications of all of that, which to me personally seem absurd. But I'm still a Scot. It's still, I'm made of rock and rain, made of porridge.
Now, in addition to your day job as a songwriter, I believe you've been writing your memoirs recently, a very different form, a different style of writing. What has that revealed to you?
Well, it's revealed how lucky I am. I mean, I'd like to think I've never forgotten that, but when you go back and you think, wow, that really happened, or this, and I still think, how fortunate. They say you should be careful what you dream for. No, I think you should dream and grab it if it comes along. We're still, it's a cliche, but we're still living a kind of existence that we once dreamed of.
We look forward to reading them then. Jim Kerr, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, thank you.
Special events.
From November 6th to 18th, Egypt will host the 2022 Sharm el-Sheikh Climate Change Conference. The climate crisis is a growing threat to the world's population. We'll be there conducting interviews and debating climate issues, but also bringing you reports and special editions. COP27, 12 days to tackle climate change on France 24.